Dealers, need more used cars fast? With Kelly Blue Book Instant Cash Offer, you can connect directly with local sellers to win more inventory, improve look to book, and lower cost to market. That's the instant advantage. Request a demo today at b2b.kbb.com/ICO.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Thursday, June 4th, 2026. I'm Kellen Walker in Las Vegas. Today on the show, the Trump administration's sweeping new tariff proposal has a carve-out for autos. Dutch chipmaker Nexperia is coming to the U.S. amid a messy ownership battle. And former Honda exec Mamadou Diallo quietly exits as Piston Automotive's CEO, and it's not clear why. Plus, new vehicles are already out of reach for a lot of buyers. The trade policies being negotiated right now could make that worse.
Any major changes to the USMCA kind of put these less expensive vehicles a little more on the chopping block, maybe compared to pickups, SUVs, and some of the more profitable ones.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. The Trump administration's latest tariff proposal comes with a key carve-out for the auto industry. Vehicles and parts already covered by existing auto tariffs would be exempt from new proposed duties of 10 to 12.5% on 60 U.S. trading partners. That includes Canada, Mexico, Japan, and the EU. Products compliant with USMCA rules of origin would also be exempt, but Boston Consulting Group's Mark Gilbert warns that some automotive electronics, interior materials, and sub-assemblies could still face new duties. The proposed tariffs could take effect in July. Dutch chipmaker Nexperia is coming to the U.S. for the first time. It's got a deal to produce automotive transistors at Minnesota-based Polar Semiconductor. The move comes as Nexperia risks losing its China operations entirely. The Chinese owner, Wingtech, is demanding more than $1 billion in damages after the Dutch government suspended Wingtech's control over the company last fall. Nexperia China has since declared independence, and chip supplies to automakers worldwide are still strained. Nissan and Honda have already had to cut production as a result. And Michigan-based supplier Piston Group has a new CEO. Its founder, former Detroit Piston Vinnie Johnson, has quietly retaken the top job following the departure of Mamadou Diallo, who joined the company just 2 years ago. Diallo previously spent nearly 25 years at American Honda. The president of Piston's Detroit Thermal Systems division has also departed. It's not clear exactly when or why either left. Piston is one of the largest black-owned suppliers in the country, pulling in more than $3 billion in annual revenue. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Dealerships that were warned by the FTC about illegal advertising practices had twice as many customer complaints about bait-and-switch and advertising behavior as the industry overall. That's according to a new study by Wide Whale, suggesting online reviews can flag bad actors before regulators do. Joining me now to talk about it is John Hutter, who covers retail F&I for us at Automotive News. John, welcome back to Daily Drive.
Hey, good to be here.
So, John, what did Wide Whale data reveal about where in the customer experience? Okay, sorry, 3, 2, 1. So, John, what did the Wide Whale data reveal about where in the customer experience these complaints are showing up most?
Well, yeah, it was interesting because the dealerships, Wide Whale, looked at a group of the dealerships that got the FTC letters, and then they compared them to basically everybody else in the industry, and they found that the dealerships, their star ratings were still pretty good. It's like 4.3 versus I think it was like 4.4, 4.5 for everybody else. So you really don't get it from there. What you do find, though, is when you go into the actual text of the reviews themselves, you find then you start finding trends where it's very clear that this stuff is happening more frequently at the at the FTC stores than at just the rest of the industry. And so where this showed up was the complaints about the financing departments the deals and advertising in the, and complaints about bait and switch behavior at the dealerships all appeared twice as frequently in the FTC pool of stores than it did in the rest of the industry. So that was pretty obvious. It also showed up. They also found there was the FTC stores had more complaints about honesty in their reviews, and they had more complaints about professionalism in their reviews. So it showed, it kind of showed up in various things that Wide Whale analyzed.
Now, what should dealers who weren't warned by the FTC take away from this study?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what the point Wide Whale was making is like, you can't just look at your overall review score. You've got to dig deeper, and you can start finding red flags there. And I think that's kind of the takeaway for dealers. Like, oh, just because everyone, overall you've done your aggregate review is good. You can find red flags about your business if you actually, read what consumers are saying.
Perfect. John Hutter, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Coming up, the average new vehicle is closing in on 52 grand. And the trade fight in Washington right now could make affordable options even harder to find. We'll hear more about that next on Daily Drive.
Dealers, need more used cars fast? You're not alone. And waiting for inventory to show up isn't much of a strategy. That's where Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer comes in. Backed by Kelley Blue Book's 100 years of trusted valuation expertise, Instant Cash Offer connects you directly with local sellers so you can win more inventory right when you need it. And because the experience is transparent and consistent from the first click, it helps build trust early, before a customer ever walks through your doors. That trust matters. It sets expectations up front, reducing friction in the appraisal process. What that means for your team is more control over how inventory comes onto your lot and more time focused on selling cars, not chasing them. It's a smarter way to source inventory in today's competitive market, and that's the instant advantage. If you're ready to connect with local sellers, win more inventory opportunities, and lower cost to market with an approach dealers rely on, check out Kelley Blue Book Instant Cash Offer. Request a demo today at b2b.kbb.com/ICO.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Kellen Walker. The formal USMCA review is set to start July 1st. Ahead of the kickoff, a new white paper is sounding the alarm about what tighter trade rules could mean for the most budget-conscious car buyers. Autos Drive America is a trade group representing international automakers, including Toyota, Honda, and Volkswagen. It wants the trilateral trade agreement to stay mostly unchanged. John Irwin covers manufacturing for Automotive News and wrote about the Autos Drive America report this week. He spoke with our own Jake Neer about what it says and why higher tariffs are making the affordability crisis worse.
John Irwin, always great to have you here on Daily Drive.
Great to be here.
All right, so why does the affordable end of the market usually take a harder hit from tariffs than the rest of the market?
Yeah, very basically, it's in large part because these less expensive vehicles are generally less profitable. They have lower margins, so at the end of the day, if there are more costs, there's less of a cushion there for these less expensive vehicles versus a highly profitable pickup or large SUV. Obviously, it varies by model and by automaker and where exactly the vehicle's built and everything. The tariff burden varies very much model to model, but generally speaking, that's what we're looking at, where the margins just aren't quite there. In addition to that, only about 3 in 10 of the affordable vehicles that are sold in the U.S. are built here. It's according to a new report by Autos Drive America, which represents a lot of the international automakers in the U.S. And basically, what they found is that about 30% of those vehicles are made here, which means obviously 7 out of 10 are made abroad, whether that's in Mexico, Canada, Asia, Europe, imported into the U.S. And obviously, those 70% of those models are subject to higher tariffs than the U.S. made vehicles would be. Obviously, the U.S. ones are also subject to tariffs, and that the parts that go into them are hit with duties and that sort of thing. But obviously, if you're importing the vehicle into the U.S., the vehicle itself is hit with the tariff. So a lot of these vehicles are built abroad, which means that those tariff bills are higher. So at the end of the day, it's kind of a combination of those factors where, if there's a pickup, for instance, or a large SUV that's made in Mexico, there might be a big tariff hit there when you're importing it into the U.S., but there's enough of a margin there where the automakers might be able to absorb that pretty easily. Whereas, a car that might be imported from Mexico, there might be less of a profit margin there, which will make it a little bit harder for them to absorb that hit. So yeah, it's a little bit more of a challenge for the less expensive vehicles.
You mentioned the Autos Drive America study, and a number jumped out to me in your article, and that's the citation from Autos Drive America that international automakers built nearly 9 out of 10 affordable vehicles made domestically. So I'm curious what that tells us about who's actually carrying the affordable market right now.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I think it largely reflects kind of the strategies that the Detroit automakers, especially Ford and Stellantis, have taken. Really emphasizing sales of pickups, large SUVs. We've seen, in recent years pull back on sedan offerings and that sort of thing, which are generally less expensive. And yeah, at the end of the day, that means a lot of the international automakers are kind of dominating that market. To be fair, GM is, in terms of total volume, if you were to rank all the automakers in terms of vehicles that are sold, $35,000 or below, GM ranks number 2 in the U.S. market. But most of those vehicles are built outside of the U.S., whereas a lot of the ones that are built here in the U.S., like you said, about 90% of them, according to this study, are made by international automakers, which I thought was pretty interesting. It kind of reflects, like I said, a lot of the strategies that the Detroit Three have, and again, especially Ford and Stellantis, have adopted in recent years, really, like I said, leaning into those highly profitable pickups and SUVs, but at the same time, kind of exiting a lot of these segments that tend to be a little bit more affordable, and that's led in part to the average new vehicle right now in the U.S. well above $50,000 right now, kind of pushing toward 52,000. It looks like, in part, that's just because of changing consumer preferences. Pickups and SUVs are very much in demand, and those cost more. But it's also in part a reflection of just fewer choices, at least from some automakers in those segments. So it's very much a market that's dominated by the international brands. Not to say that there's no representation in there from the Detroit Three, but it's very much dominated at the moment by the international automakers.
You've been reporting a lot on the push for tighter rules of origin. This is something that the White House is really pushing for. The Trump administration wants 82% North American content with a U.S. specific floor. So what happens to affordable vehicle production if that goes through?
Yeah, the devil will be in the details. Obviously, we'll have to see kind of, what's counted, how things are counted, et cetera, to really get a real grasp of what that would look like. But I think it's safe to say that, it would be something that would cost automakers, billions of dollars to have to invest to have to meet those targets, which again would kind of eat into some of the margins that we're talking about, which again are much smaller for a lot of these more affordable vehicles, generally speaking. I was talking with Jennifer Safavian, who's the CEO of Autos Drive America. This was one of the points that they were making in their report, is that, with the USMCA, when it went into effect in 2020, automakers have invested, hundreds of billions of dollars, much of it in the U.S., just to meet the newer standards that are in the USMCA currently. Much stricter rules of origin, labor requirements, that sort of thing that weren't in NAFTA. They are in the USMCA, and automakers spend a lot of money to try to get up to speed, make sure that they're able to trade parts and vehicles tariff free under the USMCA. Now, obviously, there's just new tariffs are in place on Canadian and Mexican goods, and now there's kind of talk of a revamped USMCA with higher standards. I think everyone expects, if USMCA is renewed and it gets through the review process, that there will be higher North American rules of origin. What they look like, we'll have to wait and see the whole negotiation process, see how that pans out. But I think that's something the industry is expecting, and it's going to again require pretty significant investments, which is kind of the point, is to drive investment in the US and in North America to do more production here. But at the same time, it's a lot of costs. The automakers spent billions of dollars on the previous, USMCA standards, really high costs that, they haven't really, made any returns on investment yet in a lot of cases. And so to tack, more spending on top of that. And if, they need to start looking at their lineups, maybe emphasizing some of the more profitable vehicles and maybe at the expense of some of the less expensive ones, the ones that are, don't have the margins. It's something that, automakers might have to look at, is what Autos Drive America is kind of getting at, that, it's because of the, any major changes to the USMCA kind of put these less expensive vehicles a little more on the chopping block, maybe compared to pickups, SUVs, and some of the more profitable ones.
You want to be making and selling what makes you money, right? I think that's basically, this is one of those things where if it doesn't make sense, then maybe the market shifts more toward used vehicles or something like that. But I am curious, let's say the rules of origin are adopted and implemented, if basically everything happens in a way that is not favorable to affordable vehicles, what is the real threat that those models just simply go away?
Autos Drive America, at least, is certainly trying to get that message out there that, right now there are plenty of affordable vehicles still on the market, despite the fact that, the average price of a new vehicle is over $50,000 and all of that. There are still models on the market, but the fact that consumers are very much leaning into, pickups and SUVs, that's where the demand is, and automakers are always going to chase demand. And that might push people that, maybe can't afford those vehicles, or, they're just not for them, out of the market if some of these, more affordable vehicles go away. And I do think that's sort of, kind of where we saw this during the chip shortage, even, where all of a sudden, automakers can't get chips and they have to prioritize, which models that they want to build. And, they all pretty much leaned into their most profitable and most popular vehicles, which usually meant pickups, SUVs, which, kept a lot of people out of the market, pushed a lot of people into the used market. That sent used prices rising. If at some point, it becomes a factor, for automakers, they have to decide, costs are so high that we have to decide which vehicles, we want to keep building, which ones maybe we don't. They're definitely going to go where the market's going, go where the profits are. And so, yeah, I think that's sort of this Autos Drive America report. They said this is kind of a critical moment for a lot of affordable vehicles in the market. And, this combination of tariffs and USMCA review and the kind of the uncertainty there, things, if there isn't a solution found to kind of keep costs down, you're going to see more of these vehicles maybe going away, or they're not going to build quite as many, or they might not import models into the US anymore because it might not be profitable. So I think it's a real possibility. I wouldn't say that, these vehicles are all going to completely go away overnight. That wouldn't, that's not realistic. They're automakers still want to, sell vehicles, and, it's a sizable portion of the market. Vehicles under $35,000 accounted for more than 5 million sales in the US alone last year. So, that's a sizable market, even as more people are going into the pickup and SUV lane. But at the end of the day, they'd have to choose between, profits and, maybe building a vehicle that's not quite as profitable anymore. I think it's safe to say automakers are generally going to choose the profits. So it's an interesting moment right now for the auto industry, kind of as they're kind of planning out what production footprints look like, what their product portfolios look like moving forward. It's a kind of an interesting moment, kind of an inflection point for the industry, and decisions that are made today are going to have a pretty significant impact on what vehicle lineups look like moving forward.
And we haven't really seen auto executives want to negotiate this out in the public sphere, but I'm curious, behind closed doors, we have heard groups like Autos Drive America and others say publicly that they want USMCA essentially to stay as is. I mean, that would be a good outcome in their minds. How much leverage does the broader auto industry have in these debates behind the scenes? Are there levers to be pulled to negotiate something that maybe allows them to still provide affordable vehicles while also making money and maybe giving the administration something that it wants?
Yeah, I think when you look at tariffs and how they've been implemented over the past year, I think that sort of speaks to the influence that the auto industry, has in the White House. If you go back to, February, March, early April, when a lot of the tariffs of last year, when tariffs were still, being proposed and maybe not implemented yet. If you think back to the tariffs on Canada and Mexico that were implemented in March, when they were first put in place, there was no exception for USMCA compliant goods to, be brought in tariff free. They were exempted after that, like within a couple of days, and that was in large part because of lobbying that was done by automakers, including the CEOs of a lot of these auto companies. And it's clear that the White House does listen to the automakers to some degree, at least. It's clear that they want tariffs. They want higher levels of U.S. content, North American content, but they have listened in the past to automakers. I think it's in part because the auto industry is just massive in the U.S. in terms of the number of jobs and the impact on the economy and everything else. Automakers kind of have that leverage, just knowing that they're these massive companies that employ a lot of people that have such an important impact on the economy. And I'm sure that they're right now doing kind of the same thing. They're kind of trying to lobby the White House to say, hey, here's we generally speaking, automakers are on the same page as far as they want this to remain a trilateral agreement. They don't want separate bilateral deals, which Trump and Jameson Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, at least floated as possibilities instead of the trilateral agreement. They said trilateral is really important to North American and U.S. competitiveness specifically. And then they want some form of tariff relief. I think everyone expects that there won't be zero tariffs on goods under the new USMCA, assuming there is one, but they are pushing for some form of tariff relief that at least puts North America at an advantage relative to Europe, Japan, South Korea. And we'll see how successful they are in pushing for all of that. But I think we've seen in the past with tariffs that and how those have been implemented that automakers have had some sway with the White House. We've seen that with some of the other exemptions that they put into place for USMCA compliant parts, for instance, or some of the refunds and that sort of thing. So I do think the automakers and suppliers have some sway here, but how much? Obviously, the USMCA, it covers all trade between Canada, U.S., and Mexico, and all sorts of different industries, and there are all sorts of competing interests, both in terms of businesses, economics, politics. So there are a lot of voices in the room, but I do think the auto industry will probably be among the loudest, but we'll see what that results in at the end.
If listeners of the pod are tired of hearing the word affordability in 2026, I hate to say it, but it's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's going to be a big issue going forward, and especially as USMCA talks kick off next month. John Irwin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Kellen Walker. Thanks to automotive news journalists John Hutter, Yang John, and Michael Martinez. You can get the latest news on USMCA trade negotiations, dealership compliance, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. Come back tomorrow for a conversation with Steve Kramer, Vice President of Product at Pay Near Me, about why he says auto loan payment portals need what he calls an abandoned cart strategy.
If you go to Amazon, you put something in your cart, and then you leave, you know what happens, right? You get that email. Hey, you put something in your cart. Did you forget about that? There's a reason they and most major e-commerce vendors do that. It's because it works.
We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoyed the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.